This C# console application demonstrates the use of conditional statements after getting input from users in the command line. So what's going to happen here is the user is going to enter a sales amount that's going to be a decimal value. So it can be a number with a decimal and then other numbers after the decimal. The user enters the input, and given the amount that they input, it runs a set of conditions, and then it also verifies the years that the user has been in sales and then displays other messages. So let's just first demonstrate this program and then we'll run through the code. I'm going to hit the debugger here, and the program says please enter a sales amount. So I'm going to enter an amount less than 1,000, so 456.34, and based on that it calculates a bonus, which is 5% of that amount, and the user gets $22.82 in bonus. Then it asks how many years have you been in sales. We'll say 1 year, and then a message displays, says not bad for 1 year of sale. Hit any key to exit the program. So let's try a different entry. How many? Let's do more than 1,000, but less than, say, 3,000. It's another bound. So this gives a 6% bonus, calculates a different amount. How many years? Let's put 5 years, and it displays a different message. Okay, and so let's go through the code. And again, the idea of this program is just to show you lots of different ways in which you can apply conditional statements. It also provides you with some basics of C# that we'll go over. So let's start from the top and work our way down. So right here at the top, you can see I have this /*, which demonstrates a multi-line comment. It's a good practice to put the author of a program, the date the program was created, and a little description of what the program does. So from there, right here, we have it just using system. This is all of the objects available in the .NET framework to run this program. It's just a command line interface, nothing fancy. Then we have the namespace, which is also the name of the project, the solution. And it uses right here the command line class called program that allows us to run the command line interface. Every C# program requires a main method, and that's what we have here. And so we see the static. Static just means that the object, you don't use the keyword new to create an instantiation of the object. We'll get more into object-oriented programming, where we instantiate new instances of objects at a later time. I mean, this is by definition object-oriented because we're working with a class, but when we want to instantiate objects, we have to create them so that they can use the keyword new. So we'll just do that in another code. Right here, this console.writeLine, this just allows the user to type in some information. It's going to write this line and await user input. And from that, this try-catch block is added to our code. The try-catch block is what we use to validate user input. It's an error trap methodology. So we want to try a block of code, and if any error occurs within that block of code, the program will immediately move to the catch block, which is way down here. one of the things you're going to see in the code that I write here is that I write a lot of comments, not only for learning purposes, but as you begin to write code, it's a good practice to do things like, for instance, these curly braces. So C# uses curly braces in its syntax, and you will see here that a lot of times I'll say end of a certain part of the code to keep track of these curly braces. When we're working with code in C#, it's important to stay within scope when writing the code. So a lot of times you'll see here that we not only document when blocks of code end to make sure we understand where the end of these curly braces are and stay within scope of the code, but we also follow good practice by indenting our code. And Visual Studio, you will see, creates these vertical dashed lines, which also help us see where our code is indented. This also helps us understand the logic and scope of our code. And it's just a visual technique. And so what we're going to do here when we enter in this try block is we're going to get what the user has typed in and store it in a string variable. And that's what this input is for. This console.readLine gets that. We take the value and we store it in a string. We could convert it if we wanted to right there, but I think for learning purposes it's important to understand that when a user enters something into the console, it's assumed to be a string, and we then have to parse it into the appropriate data type for our program at a later time. We could do it all in one line if we wanted, or in this case I'm demonstrating, okay, I've got this user input here, and we are gathering the sales amount from the users. So what we're going to do is declare a decimal. Why did we pick a decimal as our data type? The reason why is because when we talk about amount in dollars, decimal is appropriate, and you'll see later how we can format decimal into monetary value. You'll see that later. And so we're going to take that string and we're going to parse it as a decimal and assign it to the variable sales. So that's going to hold what the user has given us into a variable called sales in the data type decimal. We then, as you saw the program demonstrate, we're going to need to calculate the bonus of the user based on what they've entered in sales. So we're going to initialize that variable to 0, and you'll see why we have it as a decimal a little bit later, because we're going to need to calculate it. So then we also need a variable that will be used to get the number of years that the user has been in sales. You saw that demonstrated in the program. So we've got some variables, we set them up, and you'll see how those variables are used later. Now, our first conditional statement that we're going to demonstrate here is the if, else statement. These are basically testing a condition, and if the condition tests to true, it will then execute the block of code inside of that curly brace. If the condition next to the if statement tests to false, it will ignore that block of code in the curly braces and move along in the program. So the first thing we want to do is, based on what the user has entered, we determine whether that value is less than 1,000. If the value is less than 1,000, we're going to give them a bonus of 5%. So to calculate that, we then assign the value of the bonus, and what we do is we multiply the number of sales times the monetary, notice we have M here, we multiply it times 5%, and this gives a monetary value in its result. So that gives us our bonus in monetary value. So that's the 5% bonus of what was sold. Then all we're doing with console write line here, the interesting thing about this line of code is you can see here that when we write out your 5% bonus for the sales amount, we get the value in sales, which we know is monetary, and we can format it as currency here so that it's displayed like a dollar sign. And that's just one way we can format strings to display them in a certain way. So that's just an interesting technique in string display. And here we also are displaying the bonus itself in currency. So the sales amount in currency and the bonus. So there we go. And so then we then ask the user, how many years have you been in sales? We then get what the user has typed in, and we parse it as an integer. And so if the user types in anywhere between 0 and 2, here we have a case statement. So this is a switch statement, a conditional statement, inside of our if. And what we're doing is, if the user has entered in the years of sale, which they will have based on the question, if they've entered in 0, meaning they're brand new to sales, it will display this message and then exit the program when the user strikes a key. If they enter in 1, it gives this message. If they enter in 2, it gives this message. If they enter in any other number besides 0, 1, or 2, it shows basically 3 or more years. It displays this message, and the program will exit based on a keystroke. So this just demonstrates a conditional switch statement inside of the if block. So from the if block, if that tests to false, it goes to the else if block, and if the sales is greater than 1,000 and less than 3,000, it then calculates the bonus at 6% and displays the bonus and sales amount there as a 6% bonus. And then does the same thing when the user enters in the sales amount. Runs the switch conditional statement. If it's 0, 1, or 2, displays these 3 different messages. If it's 3 or more, displays this message as the default. Notice in the switch statement here, it has the syntax case, and after each test, it's a colon. And then there's this default. So if all of these test to false, the default will be displayed. It's also notable that at the end of each of these conditions, if it enters in as true, there's this break, which essentially goes and moves the program outside of the switch statement. Now, in the if-else if those test to false, the default here is else, then it then assumes that it's greater than 3,000 as the total amount of sales, whereby the bonus is 7%, displays that amount, and then tests the years in sales, the same as the other two if-else if cases that are embedded within those switch statements, and then checks the number of years in sales, and then ends the program. Now, if the user types in something that is not a numerical value, the program, like for instance, they typed in text, then the program says, hey, you need to type in a decimal data type, and then exits the program. So for instance, if I ran the program and typed in some letters, says, hey, you need to enter in a decimal data type and use, or if, for instance, they typed in a set of letters during the point in the program where it asks how many years of sales, it would also bring this message up, and then the user would exit the program and try again. So this concludes the very basics of some examples in conditional statements in the form of if, else, and the switch.